Well, hello. Well, hello, Mike Manley's back. Mike's
hello,
back. How are you, sir?
Mr. Jamar's front.
Full frontal, JN. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm full up on coffee. Ready to.
I have a half a cup here.
Ready to start the engine.
Get us through the interview.
Welcome to All and Sundry. If any of you guys remember my crusty critic column from Draw Magazine, I started everyone with "Welcome to All and Sundry." Welcome back to
Who is Sundry? I've never met them.
He's all over the place. He's around. Welcome back to the Pencil to Pencil podcast. I am your internet best friend, Jamar Nicholas, and cartooning vanguard, so says Mike Hawthorne. I am joined, as always, by my best bud and modern master of comic books, Mike Manley. Say hi, Mike.
Hi, modern master of vanguards.
That was my favorite Atari game, but I'm showing
Vanguard?
Vanguard?
What was that? Was that like Missile Command? What was that?
That was kind of like you move this way and shoot stuff. So I guess I would call that a shooter or a shmup.
Okay. I still have my Atari 2600 somewhere in the basement.
You do? Well, you can send that to Jamar Nicholas Studio.
All I remember is that was the beginning of that experience where you would play video games where your thumb would be destroyed.
Yeah, they called that Atari thumb.
Yeah,
you would get blisters yeah.
Atari thumb, and then 3 days into owning it, the little plastic thing in the ring would break, and then you couldn't.
I don't think the human hand was built to do that stuff, but we're like so many generations into that now.
Children don't understand that now.
No, you just
What's wrong with that man's hand? He's got Atari thumb, Billy.
Yeah, just like the PlayStation claw, like this. It's a whole other type of dexterity.
Now we play with our mind.
That's right. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor. Graphicsly are fine people that create Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio Paint, the cartoonist best friend. And also the podcast is brought to you by our good buddy John Morrow over at twoborrows.com, where he is celebrating the history of comics every day of the year. So I hope everybody's well. We had a really good time on our Saturday podcast, and here we are. We're right back, Mike. How you feeling about tonight? You feeling good? Gonna talk some shop. Gonna chop it up. Nice. Let me give some housekeeping for people who are watching this for the first time. Hello on YouTube. Hello on Facebook. We are live. If you are watching live, feel free to be a part of the show. I can't see you, but if you type into the chat,
we will see that.
I will see that. So please keep it honest, keep it real. If you guys want to start off by saying hello tonight and tell us where you're watching from. Mike, I found out last Saturday we had people who were staying up in Romania watching the episode live.
They always stay up in Romania.
Also, Brazil.
The pencil is our favorite.
We're worldwide, bro. We got people all over the world watching this, so I'm really excited.
Well, cartoonists stay up all over the world. That's one thing I think cartoonists have in common.
That's very true. That's very true. We know how to not go to bed.
Right. Oh, I will also say, because somebody asked me last week, if you're on YouTube and you do type your question, we will see it here.
Yes. So. Yes, that's right. So, but if you're somewhere and I can't see it, let me know later on. And
you're on the wrong channel.
That's right. You're watching the wrong thing. So let's just get into it. We have a really great guest tonight who's hanging out in the green room. Your friend and mine, Bob Mccloud. You might remember Bob Mccloud from co-creating the New Mutants over at Marvel. And Bob is always doing something interesting. I was a big fan of his picture book. Maybe we could talk about that. Was it the I don't want to get the title wrong, but it was the superhero ABC 1-2-3's book, right? And he could tell me if I'm wrong when he gets on, but I really enjoyed that. And also, Bob is an educator like you and myself. Mike Manley. So we have lots of things to talk about tonight. So let's bring them on in. Everybody, welcome to the show, Bob Mccloud.
Hello.
Hello. Let me get rid of some of these assets. So I'm going to let Mike start with the first round of chat, and I'm going to go into the comments to see what's going on. We'll load up some questions.
Okay.
Okay.
So we were talking a little bit right before the show, Bob, about you working with Neil Adams when you started. Is that where you started with Neil, or did you start before in comics before you started working with Neil?
No,
were you an actual Krusty bunker, or were you pre Krusties?
Actually, I owe my career to Neil. I was getting nowhere trying to break into comics. I sold my car. I'm from Tampa, Florida. And I was 24 years old, and figured it was about time I started doing something with my art, start my career as an artist. I always assumed I'd have a career as an artist for some, I don't know what made me so cocky about that, but I just assumed I'm going to be an artist. So I moved up to New York, sold my car to finance a trip to New York, stayed at the YMCA because it was so cheap. Got a room at the Y.
You weren't scared to stay at the YMCA in New York?
I was terrified. I flew into Queens, into LaGuardia. I flew into Queens, and it took me a week to build up my nerve to go into Manhattan.
Wow.
So what were you doing? What were you doing in that week?
I was doing samples.
I thought you were going to say push-ups. Lots of push-ups.
No, growing up in Florida, New York, we always heard was a scary place where I had all these murders and robberies and everything. And I was just grew up in the suburbs among white people. I never met a Jewish person until I got to New York.
Wow.
It was
all the Jews go to Florida when they retire. So
they go to Miami. They don't go to Tampa, or at least they didn't.
Okay.
They didn't back in the 60s. We had one black guy in my high school. They just started integrating the schools. I think there was maybe one in middle school, which we call junior high. One at first in my high school, maybe a couple by the time I graduated. There were no black people around anywhere near where I lived in Tampa. So really, anybody other than my own little world, my small world, I didn't know until I got to New York. And then there's these guys kissing on the subway. It was quite an eye-opening experience to move to New York.
You must have had some culture shock, Bob.
Yeah, extreme culture shock. But anyway, I went finally. I met Pat Broderick at the New York Comic Con. Pat Broderick had actually been in my high school art class in Tampa.
Wow.
He was a year younger than me, and our teacher, for whatever, we ended up in separate corners of the room, and I didn't really know him. I just saw him drawing some barbarian one day, and I said, "Oh, that's pretty good." And I don't know if he ever saw anything that I was drawing. The teacher said, "Oh, you draw better than I do. Just sit over there in the corner and do whatever you want." So I didn't learn anything in my art class in high school. So my first art class was later in college. But anyway, I met Pat at the New York Comic Con. I said, "Weren't you in Mrs. Nimitz's art class?" And he said, "Yeah." He was ecstatic to meet me because he was also scared of New York and didn't know anybody. We just happened by chance to go up there at the same time.
Wow.
We became roommates, and Pat got into at the time DC had this apprenticeship thing going, and they were looking for people to join this apprenticeship program. And so I said, "Well, I'll take a shot at that." And Pat actually got into that, and I didn't. So he met all these people up at DC, including Neil Adams. And so, I was sitting in the apartment doing my little sample pages, and he kept telling me, you gotta meet Neil Adams. You gotta meet Neil Adams. And I'm thinking, well, he's just another comic artist. How's he gonna help me do anything? I didn't really know. I barely knew who Jack Kirby was. I didn't know really what Neil Adams' position in the industry was. I didn't know anything because I came out of a background of reading Mad Magazine. So I knew Mort Drucker and Jack Davis, but I didn't know anything about the comic. But I don't know why. I actually, when I first got to New York, I was trying to get into advertising and got nowhere there. And so I just figured, well, I'll just do some comics until I can find something better.
Now, was this because when you were coming up, you didn't know what to have in your portfolio?
I had no clue. No clue. I mean, I had advertising stuff, various, class projects that I'd done in art school. I went a year to an art school in Fort Lauderdale. I went a year to college majoring art at Auburn University. And I quit both of those because they weren't teaching cartooning, and I wanted to be a cartoonist. I didn't want to be a fine art painter. Since I was like 5, I decided I wanted to be a cartoonist of some kind. But I had kind of my goal was to work for Disney originally, or maybe get my own newspaper comic strip. I actually submitted a comic strip that I wrote and pencil and inked, lettered when I was 19.
Wow.
They got rejected, of course. It was horrible. But I knew nothing about the comic business except that I thought it'd be easy. That'd be easy to draw comics.
Well, I think that's it's interesting because now there's a whole industry of getting into the industry, and at the time, and that's really like the last 15, 20 years is there's like an industry of getting, and comics are mainstream and are accepted as an art form, and people don't poo-poo them automatically. But coming up, and you're a little older than I am, but it was the same thing, that it was if you lived on the East Coast, like if we had lived in New York or grown up in New Jersey, we probably could have apprenticed to somebody because that's where everybody was.
Yeah.
But if you're like in Florida or Michigan, there's nobody there, and nobody in your high school teachers weren't going to say, well, Bob, you want to be a cartoonist. What you should do is,
There was none of that. But guess who lived in Tampa, Florida? Fred Laswell, that did the Snuffy Smith comic strip.
Okay.
So I went up to his studio and tried to become his apprentice, and he wasn't having it. He didn't think I was good enough.
Really?
So you did a tryout?
He just looked at some things I had done. I don't know when that was. I was probably like 15 when I did that.
A barbarian, and said, no, Bob, no, I don't draw barbarians,
Yeah, I didn't have any Snuffy Smith samples or any comic strip type art samples. It was more just generic. I had drawn some horses, and I don't even remember what I showed him. Just various stuff that I'd done in school.
Did he give you any advice? Do you remember?
Nope.
Thanks, Snuffy.
So, Bob, I'm interested in hearing the story of how you got up the gumption to go approach all of these people and just get on the road to New York, being scared out of your mind. Where did that fearlessness come from?
It came from overconfidence, really. I mean, I when I was down in Florida, I went on. I got certified to go scuba diving, and for the graduation thing for scuba diving, they took us on a trip down in the Bahamas where we'd go scuba diving, and I was flirting with this other girl on the trip, and told her I'm going to be an artist, and she said, well, when are you going to get started? I was kind of shamed into starting my career.
That's great.
So I figured, well, I better go try to be an artist then.
Well, at least she didn't shame you to try to fight great white sharks barehanded or something.
Well, I'm sorry. I just think that vein of jumping out of a moving plane is something that a lot of cartoonists have that seems to get overlooked a lot when you talk about opportunity or skill or talent. It's just, the drive to go into the dark. I think that's understated a lot.
I mean, I didn't want to have a regular job. My dad was a builder, did a lot of construction work, built houses and stuff. Manual labor his whole life up into his 70s. I knew I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be paid to draw. And so I just, however, I heard, I just figured, well, New York is where I got to go to get a job as an artist. And like I said, overconfident, I just figured, oh, you're great. We'll give you this job right away.
You really want to do this? Here, draw this feature for Mad Magazine, and
yeah,
here,
really.
Take this money from my desk.
That's great.
Really, just overconfidence, assuming that they would just look at my samples and be blown away and give me work. So I got rejected over and over. I actually went to DC, showed my samples to Joe Orlando, who was the art director at DC at that time. And he looked at this sample and he said, wow, put a lot of work into this. You did just hand lettering and everything. But you really need to go back to school and learn how to draw. And I had been to art school in college. Like I said, I thought I knew how to draw. Everybody my whole life had been telling me I could draw really well. And then I got to New York and everybody was telling me I couldn't draw. So it was really a blow, but I didn't get depressed. I just kind of was stumped. I was trying to figure out, well, what do they mean I can't draw? What are they right. seeing that I don't see? What do they know that I don't know? So I just got some comics and started trying to study them like textbook, try to puzzle it out, figure, well, what are they doing in these comics that they say I can't do? And I was just determined to prove that I could do it.
Was there? I'm really enjoying this part of the conversation, Bob. So before you got there, had you ever seen original comic pages before?
No.
And did that throw you off too? It's like,
well, I had seen Fred Laswell's Snuffy Smith's originals,
right?
But that was it. I had never seen an original comic page. Didn't know what size they were done. I knew that they worked with pen nibs and brushes from talking to Fred Laswell. But I really knew nothing. Like
so
I said,
you were not like a regular comic book reader, like you were not reading Marvels in DC.
I missed that whole Marvel explosion. I never read the John Romita Spider-Mans and the Jack Kirby, Captain America, Thor, all that stuff until I got in the business. I mean, I read Superman as a kid. So I had seen all the Superman family comics, Archie comics. But then I found Mad Magazine, and I was just absorbed with Mad Magazine.
Did you read cartoons?
Well, I always read the newspaper comics my whole life.
Right.
I stopped doing that about 10 years ago. They kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller and sillier and stupider and cutting out all the adventure strips and just leaving me with the same old gag strips.
That damn Snuffy Smith.
I mean, it was pathetic. I never saw, our paper didn't carry Judge Parker or Mary Worth or the Phantom or Prince Valiant or Tarzan or Spider-Man or anything. We just had the gag strips in our local paper.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's the small papers that carry sometimes the offbeat, the non humor strips. But I think it's very fascinating, and I'm sure when you would explain this type of your story to the students, they would probably find it very amazing and sort of perplexing that you got in the business. You did like a crash course. It sounds like okay, I'm up here. I gotta make this work, because you didn't want to go back to Florida, right?
Well, let me finish the story. So I was in New York. Finally got up to courage to go into Manhattan. Got an apartment with Pat Broderick, and I had sold my car to finance this whole thing, and I was running low on money. I needed to make some money, or I was going to have to go back to Florida. So Pat kept saying, "You got to meet Neil Adams." So I went up to Neil's studio and showed Neil my pathetic samples.
Got in the business,
and he looked at my samples and said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Anything that pays." I was like down to my last $10. I was going to call my parents and ask for bus money to go back to Tampa. And so he picked up the phone and called John Verporten, the production manager at Marvel, and said, "I got a guy here who got some potential. Well, he's got a lot of potential as a letterer, some art potential. Do you need anybody in production?" And so I got a job in the production department at Marvel just on Neil's recommendation, without them even looking at my portfolio. Wow. So that's how I started my career. And my very first job, I was taping the page numbers onto the original pages. That's, I figure I pretty much started at the bottom.
Right.
I was doing lettering corrections. I was taught how to hand letter by Danny Crespi and Mori Kuramoto, the two letterers at Marvel who designed all the logos for all the comics. And because I was in the production department, I was right there. I could meet all the editors in person and show them all my samples all the time. So it was actually a great way to break in.
And you were actually seeing artwork in the various stages, like pencils and everything.
The best stuff was going through sitting on my desk, because I had to make lettering corrections on it. And I worked my way up after a couple months to making art corrections, like moving Conan's sword from here to here, that kind of stuff. Barry Smith's red nails coming across my desk.
So what was how did your worldview of comics change, because you were immersed in it, but in a very different way than you had because you weren't doing Mad. Did you take stuff up to Mad? Did you work up stuff?
Well, my very first job, published work at Marvel, was for Crazy Magazine, their version of Mad Magazine. I did a satire of the movie Westworld. So I was paid. They paid me to go see the movie. They gave me glossy photos to draw from. I went with Marv Wolfman, the writer, and it was great. I figured, well, I've hit the big time. I finally made it. And it's a horrible job, of course. It's my first job, but I had a great time doing it. I did the originals twice up. It was a great experience, but the more I thought about it, I didn't want to. I had studied Mort Drucker so much. I can do a really good impression of Mort Drucker, but I figured, well, I'm not as good as Mort Drucker, so I don't want to be working on the same magazine that Mort Drucker is going to be in, because that's, my stuff's not as good as Mort Drucker. So, I wanted to stay away from Mort Drucker. Yeah, so I never even went up to Mad. I just, over the years, I kept doing a lot of work for Crazy. That's where my heart is, the humor stuff.
Which is probably not something that most people who are fans of your work would think of.
Mm-hmm.
No, and at the time, there were humor magazines, like Marvel had Crazy, there was Plop. There were some cracked magazines around, but everybody I was meeting was really into the dramatic comics and superheroes and stuff. And I figured, well, I can draw. I can do that. Even though I couldn't, I had to teach myself how to do it. So I started studying the realistic stuff again, just to prove that I could do it. Because it's not where my interest, even today, is not where my interest is really. I'd prefer to do humor, but that's where the work was, where the big money was. The prestige, everything. It was all about the dramatic comics.
Yeah. So did you? I'm interested in your program of self-study. Like, what did you decide? How did you figure that you would study, and how did you study? And did you, having access now, being in the bullpen, would you like go to John Romita and say, "Hey, what about these heads? What about or?"
You've met me, Mike. I'm kind of shy.
Yeah.
I would not go into Romita's office. I mean, my desk was here. Romita's office was like 10 feet away. I could have easily gone in there and had all these conversations with John. Very nice guy, but I was too shy. Basically, I never asked him any advice. He saw me working on samples, and I did one an inking sample over Buscema. And he did say, well, you need to decide if you want to be a brush inker or a pen inker. So that was helpful. I said, oh, you really, you think so? I need to choose? Because I didn't know. Actually, when I was working in production, I was sitting between Mike Esposito and Frank Giacoia, two longtime inkers, right? And instead of 10 feet away, they were like 2 feet away. And Mike was this real garrulous guy, and then Frank Giacoia was this kind of bitter guy with nothing good to say much, and so a lot of bouncing back between them. And Mike was kind of jealous of what Frank Giacoia could do, and he said, "Look at how Frank does that shine on that armor." And Frank would say, "Well, Mike, it's just a little squiggle. What's the big deal?" So it was fun working with them. But I was sitting in there one day, and Mike Esposito says, you could learn to be an inker a lot faster and easier than you could learn to be a penciler. I said, oh, inking, yeah, oh, okay. Because that had never occurred to me to just be an inker. I wanted to learn to do everything. I could draw. I figured, well, I'm going to be a penciler. It never occurred to me to be an inker. But so then I did these inking samples, and got an offer from one of the editors. Tony Isabella gave me a shot at inking something maybe 5 months after I started at Marvel. And then my inking career kind of took off.
I have a question from the room, Bob, which leads very smoothly into what you're talking about. Our good buddy J. Robert Deans, JRD as we affectionately call him, asked the first question of the evening. Bob, having been a penciler as well as an inker, when you're inking, do you have a preference for penciling styles, loose, tight, in between? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, as an inker, I always wanted the barest breakdowns, because that allowed me to take over and do whatever I pleased with them. I hate inking tight pencils. I think it takes all the life out of your work as an inker. It's kind of just mindless tracing too much of the time. So I just needed a layout. Even stick figures, just show me where the figures go and what angle you're showing it from, how close they are, and the pose they're in, and I'll take it from there.
And I think also the difference is that when you started, the pencils weren't always quite as tight. I mean, like even Buscema's tight pencils, they didn't look like they were inked. Like guys eventually started drawing stuff that looked like it was inked.
Yeah, when I started in the mid-'70s, pencilers didn't try to pencil tightly so that you could print from the pencils. They wanted the inker to contribute style to the art. and make a contribution. They didn't want to be traced. So the pencils were sketchy and rough. Background sometimes kind of just suggested. So it was a perfect time to break in, really, because there was just so much. It was so much fun taking somebody's pencils and then just doing whatever I wanted to finish them up. Because at the time, I didn't know storytelling. I didn't know anatomy. I didn't know how to pose dramatic poses. I didn't know all this stuff involved in being a penciler. So I could draw well, but I didn't know what you need to know to be a penciler. And so if you hand me somebody else's pencils where they've solved all those problems for me and I just have to make it look pretty, I had a great time.
Well, there is, like the language of cartooning. So you can draw, you could draw a figure well, but it may not work for what you need in comics. There's a lot of people that go through that in the beginning where you can put too many wrinkles on the shirt. You can put too much detail. And so were you, your first jobs, and you're mostly a brush inker, right? Would you say now you're always been mostly a brush inker?
Not always. Now I mostly use a brush, and when I started, I mostly used a brush. But then I got infatuated with Tom Palmer's inking, and he's like 95% pen. And Neil Adams, I love Neil's brushwork as well, but he did a lot of pen inking. So I started using a pen after the first couple years into inking. I switched over to pen like Palmer, like almost all pen. And I kept trying to find the same pinpoint that Palmer used, and he wouldn't tell us what he used. And Rubenstein and I were always looking for pinpoints that could do something like Tom Palmer was doing. And so Rubenstein showed me this Hunt pinpoint 103, not the 102 that everybody uses. The 103 is a really flexible pinpoint. It's actually very difficult to handle, and it took me a lot of practice to get the hang of it. But then once I kind of mastered it, I just used that for years, inking with just the Hunt 103.
But that's not what Tom used.
I don't know what, to this day, I don't know what Tom used.
I think he used the Gillot.
Well, when I started, Neil was using the Gillot 290.
Right.
And that could be what Tom used. I don't know. I used that because Neil did when I started. He had the 107 and the Gillot 290. And so that's what I used. And the 290 was an amazing pinpoint. I could do some great stuff with that. But then they discontinued it and brought it back, and it wasn't the same.
Yeah. Neil said that that's what he used because that's what, and then Stan Drake used the
right. Yeah.
So,
I think. Go ahead.
The new one, the metal is probably not the same because even the Hunt 108s that I have now, I still have some from the 80s, and there's a real difference in how they tempered the metal or something. It just does not. They pop now.
Yeah. You're younger than me, but not that much younger. So you know that the art materials today are crap compared to what they were 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
40 years ago. I remember Al Williamson complaining that the ink wasn't as good as it used to be back in the 70s.
And you go like, I would kill to have that ink now.
Yeah. I used Pelican ink my whole career. Yeah. And Pelican ink's not what it used to be now.
No, they brought it back. And I think Brett bought a bottle of it. And I think Walt Simonson was using that ink. But Al also said that the pen points, because he used the 108, the Hunt 108, but I forget what it was that he said that he used in the 60s, but you could get a finer line and the ink flowed better, so you could get a better line.
Exactly, sure.
Yeah. So
yeah,
now,
the ink's going better. That's a big deal. You don't realize whether you're using a brush or a pen, the ink is thicker and gunkier now. It doesn't have that fluidity that it used to have when Frazetta was doing all those beautiful lines and Bernie Wrightson was doing those long feathering lines. So, I mean, I was doing a lot of long feathering lines. I just can't do them anymore. Winsor Newton brushes aren't as good as they used to be.
no, they're like a mop now, but they still charge you. They charge you a lot of money.
Right. Yeah.
You know? There was a time. Well, you know, it's funny. I learned a few things from Tom Palmer, getting to know him over the years, and he was telling me how the Kolinsky sables and how they use the hair from around the butt, the anus. That was the most durable hair, evidently. And, you know, they had people cut those brushes. It was all handmade. It was not all done by machines.
Yeah.
And what happens is they don't use the butt hair anymore, I guess. And it's all done by machines. It's not, a village of old ladies picking butt hair and making brushes. I don't know, but it was the last good brushes I got were the 80s. They were Langnickel brushes. Brett still has a bunch of them. I have a few that are kind of beat up, but those brushes were so much better than anything that you can buy now. And I know it, unless you do it, you don't really understand it. It's like, it's just trying to describe the performance of a race car if you've only driven a Beetle or something, It's like
Bob, did you hoard or save any old supplies and just kind of keep it for special occasions?
Well, I had this bottle. Here's my old Pelican ink bottle.
Nice.
I had that it's pretty big. It lasted for years, and then I wasn't inking for a while. I was doing other things, and the ink kind of got gunky and isn't any good anymore. But I mean, I saved that. I had some brushes. I had some pinpoints. My favorite thing that I've had since I started in the business, an electric eraser.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a sturdy.
They don't make those anymore.
They don't make them. It's made out of metal. It's amazing. And instead of having to use whiteout to fix mistakes, I would erase with that using the pencil nib, not the ink nib, because the ink would go right through the paper. But
I'm sorry, Bob. Didn't people kind of like burnish off of Zipatone with the electric eraser too? Like to kind of like put white
you can erase on the surface.
Yeah, I've heard of that, but I never did it.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that, Bob, because a little while ago, maybe a year or two ago, I remember Brett was scouring eBay because, like you and me, he has the old Alvin electric eraser, but you couldn't find the metal erasers that would ink the erasers that would ink the ink, because there's the one that erases the pencils, the soft ones, but there was those harder ones that you use to erase the ink, and then they stopped making them, and then people would put them on eBay for like $1 gazillion because
well, actually, I didn't like the ink ones, the gray coarse ones for erasing ink. They tore up the paper too much, so I used the pencil one. And I've still got a couple boxes of those. There's a dozen in each box, and you just have to stay a little longer, and it'll take the ink off.
Yeah,
and it does it so smoothly; it doesn't dig into the paper, so you can, if you're careful, you can't even tell that you made a mistake.
Or you could be like Ricardo Villagran and take it all off with a razor. I would see him take a sharp razor, and he would just, like a jeweler, be able to take off just like the right amount of surface on that, because he didn't like whiteout. So, and Al didn't like Williamson didn't like whiteout.
I watched Neil Adams do that, and he got it. Stan Drake used to do that, and I've done that too. But then I found the electric eraser.
I have a quick question from the
Hi, Neil. Look at here. Look how easy this is.
Mike. I have a quick question from the room. Our good friend Mama Carla asks, "What is the longest you've ever kept a bottle of ink?" That's amazing. As there's a shelf life to ink that I don't think everybody knows about.
Yeah, and if you don't stir it, it'll separate and go bad more quickly. You have to use it and stir it and take care of it to keep it a long time. But I showed you, I used a quart-sized bottle or pint, whatever that is, as opposed to the now. You buy these little things.
Yeah.
And that's about the biggest bottle of ink you can get.
Mm-hmm. And I've always said that to be a cartoonist, you're kind of like a part-time chemist too, and an inventor. Like you just have to conjure ways of problem solving all the time. Sometimes there's chemicals involved.
Yeah, and Rudy Nebres used to water down his ink quite a bit so that he could get those fluid brush strokes. So if you looked at his originals, they were very gray, and I was surprised to see they printed perfectly black, even as gray as they were.
Yeah, I think if it's 40% black, it's 40% density, you can shoot it and it will come out. It will reproduce well.
Yeah, I swear a lot of his looked like 20%. They were so light gray, and yet they printed black.
Yeah. Well, Frazetta, a lot of Frazetta's inking, if you look at his inking, it's not black. It's gray.
It's amazing because he has all kind of shades of gray in his inking. I love his ink stuff.
Yeah. So I think those guys. Same way with Wrightson or Jack Davis, another great. That guy could ink like a monster. He did so many amazing techniques with the pen and the brush.
Yeah.
But yeah, Al would always complain that he would have a bottle of ink just for his brush and a bottle of ink for his pen, because the ink would get thick so fast that he'd have to take the pen ink, dump it in the brush ink, and pour new pen ink, because even after a day or two, it would just thicken up too much for him. And
I keep leaving the cap off, and then it dries up that much faster. So, luckily, once you become a professional, you start making money. And I never really thought that much about how much my materials were costing me. I just figured it's an expense of the job. You just got to get good materials to do good work. And I just didn't even worry about how much a brush cost or how much the ink cost or how often I had to replenish them.
Mm-hmm.
I just, whatever, had to do it.
Luckily, you didn't do like Gil Kane and buy fugitive markers and ink all that stuff with markers and then watch it disappear year by year.
Yeah, no, I've pretty much all the marker stuff. I mean, maybe some of my very early convention sketches were done with fading markers, but I discovered the pigment markers about the time I started experimenting with inking with when Neil started inking his comics with markers instead of pens and brushes, I tried them out, and microns and the pit pens. But I've seen, there was a Jim Starlin commission that somebody actually paid me to re-ink because it was becoming invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had faded so badly you could barely see it. So they paid me to trace it in permanent ink, probably making it less valuable in one way, but then it's not going to be very valuable. It just disappears either.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a question from the room, since we're having a very lively discussion about inks. Our good buddy Stunt Ken, what up, Stunt Ken, says, have you guys ever used Japanese inks like the Sumi E brand? How does that compare to the inks you're talking about? If I'm not mistaken, I always heard that the Sumi ink wasn't waterproof.
Yeah, it wasn't waterproof. I have not tried it. Have you, Mike?
No.
I mean, I have a ton of it.
Oh, really? I mean, I haven't tried it for comics, because basically everything I want to do, yeah, I don't think it's waterproof. So, you could do it to like tone something or do a wash on something, but it's not. If it's not waterproof, then it's not something you really want to risk working on. Even like if it's not, if you're working, your hand is moist, it'll smear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Why have you got those, Jamar?
I come up against stuff, and kind of like from what I've been doing all these years, I haven't really used a lot of this stuff, but I'll just kind of pick around with it. But I don't have a lot of work that has kind of disappeared over the years. When I was really early in my cartooning career, I learned early not to use bad materials. But I did probably use more markers than I should have at a certain point. So I haven't really had the archival issue, but I don't want to use stuff that's not going to last. So it's kind of maybe gun shy to even use this stuff.
I do have some Gil Kane originals that he inked in marker back in the 70s, and they're still perfectly fine like the day he did them because I've kept them in a drawer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's the light that makes them fade.
Yeah.
Oh, I have another question about materials, and usually when I hang out with you guys, I hear more about this, about how the stock of Bristol board has changed over the years also. Because, I would talk to guys and everybody would kind of gripe about how the Marvel board sucks now or whatever. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this thing I showed you earlier that I just inked, I penciled it back in 83, and I'm just now inking it this week. But it's on 1983 Marvel comic paper, and it's a dream to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, compared to today's paper, that's just no comparison. I think someone said that they pressed it twice or something. So it's smooth. You can just ink easily with a pen nib without catching the fibers in the paper and splattering the ink and tearing up the paper.
It has a higher rag content,
mm-hmm.
like actual, because when they say so much rag or whatever, it was actually the fiber like you would find in a pair of pants or something, that they would put in when they would make the paper. And it's true, they ran it through twice. That's what John Romita told me, that Marvel had them run that paper through twice, and that's why we feel that surface has just the right amount of texture to it for your pencils. It's not like they used to also have the rougher paper. Like DC used to have this paper that was pretty rough, and it would eat your pencil up. But that paper there, I still have some. I think everybody's hoarding their old stock of Marvel.
I have maybe 2 other sheets.
Would you guys recommend anything that's fairly new that works well for you, or what you're using now, Bob?
I mean, I just buy Strathmore out of Dick Blick. I haven't found any paper that I love. I was buying Joe Kubert's paper for a while, Blue Line comic paper. I was trying all different stuff. I haven't found anything. I mean, I'm comparing it to the old Marvel stuff, and nothing matches it. So I just try to make the best of whatever I'm doing. If I'm working on lousy paper, I'll switch to a marker brush instead of a pen nib or even a regular brush.
I might be the weirdo, but I really enjoyed Canson's that fanboy paper, like that Bristol. It was kind of flimsy,
weird.
But I really like that stuff, and it's hard to find it now.
Really? Because that was like when I would go to Blick, they'd always have like a big stack of the Canson.
We bought it all.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I remember I went to Michael's. This is probably like 7, 8, 9, probably 11 years ago, and Michael's had a big end cap display of the fanboy comic book board, and it was like 50 cents a pad. And remember, Mike, I bought like the whole thing. I think I just like dumped off a bunch at your house.
Right.
It's just like, you'll never find this stuff again. I tried to buy everything.
Well, but Bob's right. If you're using something like that, which has a 150 pound, it's not, the paper's not that good. You really have to use either a brush or a marker. And the cheaper the paper, even the brush will bleed, will spider on you, because you put it down, it just the surface won't sit on the surface. It absorbs in and it kind of bleeds out. So you're almost forced in that case to use a marker, because it's the only thing that the paper will be able to take.
I think that's one reason I switched back to brush after inking with a pen for a couple decades, because the paper quality had gotten so bad I couldn't ink with a pen nib anymore. It kept catching on the paper, so I just went back to brush inking, and I love inking with a brush anyway.
Right. So now, when you were learning, were there certain artists that you feel like you were learning more for? You said, I'm gonna study these guys because this is leading me. I'm getting something out of this, you know.
Well, when I was learning, it was the mid '70s, and the top guy at Marvel was John Buscema, and the top guy in the business was Neil Adams. So I figured, well, if I want to learn how to do this stuff, I need to study these two guys. I didn't know who Giraud was or any of the European artists. It looked like, as much as I love Givaparo's work, it looked like he was inking with some old thick pen. I didn't know what he was inking with.
Like a lettering pen or something.
Yeah. Joe Kubert, same thing, some broomstick handle. I didn't know what he was using. But I really admired Neil's inking and John Buscema's storytelling, penciling. So I studied Buscema to learn how to pose the figures and to better my anatomy, how to move the camera around, how to do comic storytelling, basically. And then I studied Neil for the surface, how to render things, the techniques he would use, how he would ink dark hair, you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then I Tom Palmer was inking Neil's pencils, and I kind of got infatuated with a lot of the stuff Tom Palmer was doing.
So when you were in the bullpen, would you run over and see like what the new Tomb of Dracula looked like, or would you try to see what did you make copies of people's pencils and stuff?
I mean, Tomb of Dracula pages were coming across my desk, and I was a huge fan of Gene Colan and Tom Palmer on Tomb of Dracula. That was my favorite comic, actually. It was the only series that I read faithfully. I also read Conan, Tomb of Dracula and Conan. I wasn't really into superheroes that much, but I read Tomb of Dracula and Conan, and became good friends with the guy, Phil Rachelson, who used to be in the stat room at Marvel, and he would make photostats of some of the originals for me. And Marvel's whole horrible Xerox machine that was always out of toner, I would make copies of Buscema's pages and whatever. So I have a lot of pencil copy Xeroxes of Buscema's stuff and a few other things.
That was supposed to be great just to pull out to look at.
Yeah, it's amazing. They're fabulous. Yeah.
So would you say there was a point at which you felt like your learning curve was accelerating?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I went from being just a humor artist, drawing funny people, to becoming a comic book penciler and inker, which is there's so much you have to learn to draw comics. I mean, there's so much, and I didn't have a life. You know, I was living in New York. I was single. Just every waking hour, I was studying and drawing and inking, trying to learn my craft. And I remember one thing I did, I went through a Conan comic and I copied every single Conan figure in the comic, but I only drew them all about maybe an inch and a half, 2 inches tall, just to learn how Buscema twisted the torso and where he was putting the arms and legs, that kind of thing. So I had this big page. It was bigger than 11 by 17. It was maybe, I don't know, 15 by 30 or whatever. And I just filled it with all these figures, went to bed, and I swear the next morning when I woke up, I could draw better. It just absorbed overnight. My mind made sense of it all, and I feel like I made a big leap just overnight.
Wow. The kids call that leveling up.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Were you ever able to take in any of his chalk talks that he did back in the day? Supposedly, Buscema did.
No, I moved back down to Tampa after 6 years. So I was there one time. They had Buscema come in, and all the young artists were pulled in, and he was supposed to teach us how to draw faster. So he got up there, and I mean, I don't remember everything he said. The main thing I remember was he said, well, just draw faster. You
want to be fast? Draw fast.
He said, don't put those 12, 20 lines down, trying to get the arm. Just draw a line for the arm, which is easy for him to do, And one of the guys in the class said, well, how do you draw Conan lying down so that he looks like his weight is on the floor? And he said, well, you just do it like this. And he drew him in about 5 seconds, and it looked great. I mean, I didn't get a lot out of that class. It was just one evening, so he could be a great teacher, but I didn't learn anything in that one class.
So basically, the takeaway is, if you want to be really good, just be John Buscema.
There you
go. That's all.
Hey, Bob, before we go to the next subject, I want to put another question on the screen, which kind of goes back to us talking about critiques and crits earlier. Our buddy Stunt Ken again asks, what are your thoughts on the generation gap for your generation and today's on taking critique? You guys got really tough crits, but yet you worked on it. And today's generation seems to not handle that so well and seems to give up more easily or can't handle harsh criticism. You think that the times have changed that? I'd like to hear from either of you about that.
Yeah, well, Mike, you can speak in a minute, but yeah, definitely, when I grew up, and probably Mike too, parents were, the whole world wasn't centered around children the way it can be in more recent times. Parents were a little more distant, and kids were to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
And our egos weren't stroked the way that a lot of kids today are. I mean, even when I was growing up, like I said, everybody was telling me how well I could draw and was very complimentary, to the point where I just knew I could draw. And even when Joe Orlando told me I needed to go back to school and learn how to draw, it just made me want to prove to him that I do know how to draw. It didn't make me start crying or want to give up. Or actually my sister used to draw with me when we were kids. We would draw together, my older sister, and she took an art class in college and got an F on a watercolor painting she did. And it so discouraged her, she quit doing art.
Wow.
So maybe it just has to do with your makeup, your who you are, your personality, whatever. I guess I'm kind of stubborn. Um, if whenever I was criticized, I just tried to figure out, well, why are they saying that? What are they seeing? And a lot of times the criticism's valid, and that's fine. And then I would learn something. I always welcome criticism. Joe Rubenstein and I used to really criticize each other's work severely, and we learned a lot from it, going back and forth like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with you. I think that, first of all, your parents were not your friend. Older people did not. The first job I had in a small ad agency, my boss, whose name was Rock, he was just like Sergeant Rock. He would not take bullshit from you. And if you fuck something up, if you mess something up, he would tell you that you messed it up. Now, he would tell you how to fix it, but he would not say, here's your gold star for showing up today, Mike. Right?
Yeah, right.
And I do think that older generation, the guys that we came into the business and trained under, came from a time where this situation was tougher. If you don't like it, get the hell out. I don't have time for you. I don't have time for your crying. You can't go in and cry. You don't get a star for just nobody. I would say this, when you played sports, the scrubs only got to play in the fourth quarter when you were up 30 points.
Garbage time.
Right. That's when you would get to go in the game. Right. And that's the way the world always worked, is that and if you could not take the criticism, they would say that basically you didn't have what it took to be in the business. You were not strong enough to be in the business. Now it's sort of structured that every kid, when you're playing sports, everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a trophy for participating. It actually sets up this real false dichotomy, because when you leave art school and everyone told you, hey, you're great, and thank you for your $40,000 a year, you were great, and then you go show your work to a real professional who has real demands on what they have to do, they're not going to look at your thing and go, wow, that's great. They may not actually even reply to your sample. So I think it's the old school way was better because it was actually more honest. I mean, I know we talked about this being as a teacher. I think the worst thing you can do to a teacher, as a teacher, is to not be honest to your student, because what it does is it sets them up for that big hit later on. If you just go, oh, that looks great, that looks great, that looks great, that looks wonderful, looks great. They graduate, they take their portfolio, and it just goes out into the void. And probably, like in today's world, you don't ever hear anything back when you send something out. I mean, in our day, you had to actually schlepp your portfolio. You went to New York, right? Yeah. So like today, the student would not go to New York. They would just find out who the guy at Marvel was that you submitted your portfolio to, and you'd attach your samples in an email, and you would send it and never hear anything back. I mean, you actually went to the mountain, as they would say, and you showed your stuff.
Right.
Even if Joe Orlando was mean to you and said, gee, Bob, this sucks. You really need to know how to draw. He's also challenging you to see if you really got what it takes, because this job is harder than anybody thinks it will be when you actually do it every day for a living.
Yeah.
It's so much harder. And Joe Orlando actually was very nice. He gave me that brutal statement in a nice way, but he was very straight shooter with me. Told me the truth and pulled no punches, and it got me to decide to prove that I could do this. Maybe it would make somebody else decide to go home and do something else. I don't know.
I think they would go home anyway. That's how I feel now, especially after having taught as long as I have. I think, when you meet that fellow zealot on the road that really wants to do this, and they will almost do anything they have to do it. And then there's the other people who say they want to do it, and then the first big, bump comes. How many times did you get rejected, right? How many times did you say in the first couple years was your work rejected?
Mike, I got rejected all through my career. I still get rejected today. I'm not getting work from Marvel today. DC's not calling me up to work on Superman anymore. And I can still draw Superman. I can still draw comics as well as I ever did. All through my career, I've been criticized and rejected. And you have to have a thick skin, and you have to have confidence in yourself.
Hey guys, our good buddy June Brigman says from the chat room, when Bob told me my work was awful, I knew he was the teacher for me.
That actually brings up a funny story. Hi, June. June took lessons from me when she was trying to learn how to do this. And I tried my best to discourage her because I really didn't think she was going to be able to make it. And I didn't want her to spend 5 years like I did struggling and then not have success. So I was really tough on her and just really tried to discourage her and do something else. And she was so stubborn and persistent. And look at the great career she ended up having. Still has.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like I said, I realized probably because of teaching and meeting like the earlier version of myself, right? Every time you walk into the classroom in the fall, you're teaching a new class of students, you're meeting a younger version of yourself, right? All these people with dreams, desires, hopes, they all want to do something. And so one of the things I realized is that it's the one thing I always have to be is honest, right? Now, some people take honesty, like saying this drawing is not very good, is just being the meanest thing.
You're being mean. Don't
right.
be mean.
But
right.
What I always try to do is say, this doesn't work, but this is how you can fix it, right? Put a piece of tracing paper over it.
Don't just say it's bad, but say, why is it bad? And show them how to do it better.
Yeah. And I think that's, we said it earlier in the show. Now there's this whole industry of how to get into comics, right? Of how to do anything. You want to be a chef, there's like YouTube, there's all this stuff. So there's a lot more access to information to how to do this job now than there was 30 years ago. Because if you didn't go to New York, all that stuff you learned you started learning it actually when you were in New York, in the studios, in the offices, and you go, oh, that's how that's done, or that's why that's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we also were able to be critiqued, and it's harder to find critiques today maybe than we had back then. So you're working away, and you don't realize how little you know a lot of times. You don't realize how bad your stuff is because no one's telling you, boy, that's bad, and here's why it's bad. This is what you're doing wrong, and if you just do this, it'd be so much better. I mean, I still offer. I rarely get taken up on it, but I do correspondence lessons for people where they send me samples of the work, and I try to get them up to that next level and show them how to do it better. But I charge for that because I spend sometimes days on it, and I have to charge something for my time. So I don't get a lot of people, and I'm not John Buscema, so I don't get a lot of people taking me up on that offer.
I also see just with that, and you're starting to see this also with a lot of pros who don't want to do crits because usually there's so much pushback from the person in front of you that it's not worth your effort, besides either just straight up ignoring whatever advice you're giving them or, having to deal with their defensiveness. Oh, I meant to do that. Oh, well, I left the good one back in my hotel room. You know what I mean? Like it's really hard for people to learn how to listen and absorb criticism without having that, that jump back to, defend your actions when you're obviously there for a reason.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me though. I tell them what I think of their work, and I show them why it's wrong. I show them exactly what they're doing wrong, and if they don't like it, fine. If they pay attention to what I'm telling them, great. Doesn't bother me either way. I'm happy to help people, and I'm not going to tell them it's good if it isn't good.
Sure.
And I've had a lot of people come back to me like a year or two later and say, "Oh, that was the best advice I've ever been given, and I'm so glad that I met you then and got that critique." Mm-hmm. But I don't, not like Neal Adams, I don't try to make them cry. I'm never being mean.
Well, no, I mean, that's not what I was saying, but I really see a lot of people just feeling like it's not worth the effort of having to wade through people's tears when you try to give them an honest crit. It's just like, You know what? It's not worth my effort. Go to YouTube if you want to learn how to do this then.
Yeah, but see, I feel it's important. I had such a hard time learning all this stuff, and I couldn't find anyone to actually teach it to me. I was never an apprentice to anybody. And so I feel like I have an obligation to give back and try to pass on the knowledge that I've learned to the young kids. So I do that whenever I can. Like Mike was saying, I used to teach at Pennsylvania College of Art and Design in Lancaster for about 10 years until I just decided it was taking up too much of my time and I wasn't doing any artwork. But I love to teach. It's very rewarding to teach, and I feel it's important to teach. So I don't want to just do artwork and ignore everybody trying to come up and join me in the profession.
No, I agree. Here I have another comment from the room. Our good buddy Mike Hawthorne. It says, it's like a mad world in the chat room. Look at all these people. A couple of years back, Bob looked at my portfolio and said, "You might have a future." And I felt like I'd made it. He gives great crits. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Mike was already pretty good when I looked at his stuff, and he, of course, today he's amazing. He's a great artist. He's another one that's giving back and teaching all this stuff that he's learned as a teacher, and publishing books on anatomy and whatever to help young people learn. He's a great guy.
Yeah. I think that's something that you find that we have in common with some people like that, who really like to. I think when you have to struggle to come up and teach yourself, it almost makes you feel like like you said, like you want to pay it forward by helping people trying to do the same thing that you wanted to do, because you remember how tough it was, and it's very rewarding, especially when somebody you taught actually goes on and does become successful. That's like the ultimate.
I was so happy that June made a successful career after working with me. And I don't want to makes you feel really good as a teacher when one of your students has some success. And June, I love you now. You're an amazing artist and an amazing person, and we're good friends.
Thanks, June, for hanging out.
So why don't we jump forward a little bit? I know everybody's sort of anxious with the to hear about the new mutants and everything, and but you did a lot of stuff before. You were doing Star Wars. You were jumping around a lot then in those few years.
My whole career, I jumped around a lot, and the reason I jumped around a lot is because I wanted to ink my own pencils, and I wasn't fast enough to do that on a monthly book. So I would ink. My inking career took off before my penciling career, and so I did a lot of inking, but then I started doing penciling, and every time I would get on a series as a penciler, I wasn't able to ink it, and I would get fed up with the way it looked because it didn't look the way I wanted it to look. It didn't look the way I was drawing it. And I had some good inkers. Even Tom Palmer, my favorite inker, inked me on Star Wars. And he did a lot of things that just blew me away. But then again, he would do some things that I said, well, why did he do that? Why didn't he just do it the way I drew it? So it's not that it was not good, because he's Tom Palmer. It was great, but it wasn't the way I wanted, the way I would have done it. It wasn't the way I wanted it to look. And there's that trade-off whenever you work with another artist. You know, it's never going to be exactly your work because it's two different artists. But I wanted to ink my own stuff, so I just kept jumping from one project to the next, looking for something different. And actually, I did Star Wars after I left the New Mutants.
Oh, okay. I don't remember. I don't remember your timeline.
Oh, come on, Mike.
But so how did you become involved in doing the New Mutants? And was it something that you were like, where you were like an X-Men fan, or did you just go, hey, here's an opportunity to start something with #1, kind of do my own thing from the ground up kind of thing?
No, I had only done a few fill-in penciling jobs. I had just started penciling in 1979 and got the New Mutants job in 1982. So I had only done maybe 3 or 4 or 5 fill-in penciling jobs. And I think Paul Smith had just left the X-Men, and I did a couple of issues, fill-in issues on the X-Men, 151 and 152. And Chris Claremont and Louise Simonson, the editor, liked what I did on those issues, evidently, and they offered me the job of being the regular penciler on the X-Men. And as I said before, you know, my heart is in humor, not in superheroes, but who didn't like the X-Men? I mean, that was a top book. It was a lot of fun. I really wanted to draw the X-Men. And then they just said kind of offhand, but then again, you know, we're going to be doing a spinoff of the X-Men. We hadn't got a title yet, but it's going to be a series with some younger kids mutants, and you could be co-creator on that book if you'd rather do that. I mean, what an offer, right? I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
When I think back on it, that they even offered it to me. But I guess everybody else was busy. I don't know. Good timing, being in the right place at the right time. And I said, well, I mean, as much as I want to draw the X-Men, when am I going to get another chance to be co-creator on a new series? But you have to remember, at the time, we didn't know if the New Mutants was going to bomb. Maybe it would only last 6 issues and that would be it. It would get horrible reviews. We didn't know. It was a gamble. So it was a very tough decision to decide to do the New Mutants. But of course, I'm glad I did.
Do you remember the reading the script? Did they pitch it as a plot? Did Chris give you a plot, or did he really have everything? And how much did you get to put into it?
Yeah, well, first of all, before we got to a plot, and I worked from plots, not finished scripts, although Chris's plots are he would give you, you know, like 50 pages worth of story that you had to squeeze into a 22-page comic. But we, on the phone and in person, mostly on the phone, we just discussed which characters we were going to use in the book, whether they were going to have school uniforms or individual costumes. I wanted to have more females on the team because every other team before that had more males and like a token female.
Right.
And Chris was writing female characters, so he was good with that. And you know, all these things we were thinking about. And he had some names that he ended up actually changing, a couple of them, and powers that kind of were somewhat fluid and changed a little bit. But he had a lot of ideas before they brought me in. But then he needed someone to just kind of firm everything up and decide what these characters were going to look like, nail down what we were going to call the book. You know, a lot of decisions had to be made before I got that first plot. And then it was just going to be a regular comic. There was no deadline, no schedule. I was going to be able to do my very best work on it. And I got maybe 3 pages into it, and the graphic novel line was starting up, and they were looking for projects to turn into graphic novels. And so they decided they wanted to do the New Mutants as a graphic novel. And I said, oh, graphic novel, yeah, that'd be great. Sure, fun. But the graphic novel schedule was different than the comic schedule. And instead of having a lot of time to do 22 pages, suddenly I had no time to do 50 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to just rush like mad. And this was my very first regular penciling assignment. I was still working out my storytelling and figure poses and everything. And to have to crank out those pages so fast. And then not everybody, a lot of people have heard this story. They were going to give the inking to a different artist, Armando Gil. They were thinking about giving the inking to Armando. And I said, guys, it's a graphic novel. It's my first series. You got to let me ink this thing. I really want to ink this. And, you know, because I started my career as an inker, the ink's very important to me. I know there's some pencilers that just take whatever inker they get. They're more interested in the storytelling and everything. But I was very, the finish was just as important to me as the layouts. So I really wanted to ink this book. And I just happened to be getting married at the same time. And so,
no stress.
So it turned out that if I wanted to ink this book, I had to ink some of it on my honeymoon.
Wow.
Welcome to comics.
Yeah.
You're like, I do, and you're like, inking. I do, honey. I do.
Yeah.
I'll be there in a minute.
Yeah.
Wow.
How'd that go over, Bob?
Luckily, my wife knew someone that owned a house on the beach, and she gave us a really good price on her beach house. So we, Anna Maria Island in Florida, I don't know if you know where that is. It's a really nice place. Mm-hmm. We had a month-long honeymoon on the beach. So instead of just a weekend or so, we had a whole month. And so I had plenty of time to enjoy the honeymoon and still get a lot of work done.
Oh, that's really cool.
Wow. But often it seems like when opportunity knocks, especially in comics, it always starts out as this ideal, the sun's shining, it's beautiful, you'll have plenty of time, you got all the perfect writer, the perfect inker, the perfect colorist, and then by the time you actually start working on the thing, well, the inker's gone. Yeah. I know you're supposed to have 4 weeks to do it. You've got 10 days. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times, basically every time, I think, in my career that has always happened. By the time they tell you, you hear about a project, get excited about it, the actual thing starts to happen. That's always what happens. Is the
deadline?
Yeah.
Deadlines were always, just awful. Yeah.
And what I always think it's funny now. We talked about it before. So back then it was 12 weeks. 3 months before the book would be on the stands, people would be like having a shit fit, like, oh my God, And now literally you will finish something today and in 10 days it's in the comic book store. So it's like the time is that technology has allowed was a crisis at 3 months to become a crisis at a week.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny that has not changed anything when it comes to that. No matter
They
what
just
job.
Hey, we can do this in 10 days now, and so they schedule it for 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know anyone. I mean, that was always the way. I mean, was that way when I was on Batman? Or was that way on every single? It's easier when you're the inker, except you always get the whip end because it's like the penciler's late, and you got to make up that time. And I think you're one of those. I always think you're one of those smart guys because I don't remember or think of you as the guy who came in and cleaned up. You know, like, oh, Bob, here's 11 pages. It's Friday at 5, and I need them Monday. You didn't seem to do that to yourself.
I did a few jobs like that. I mean, I wasn't someone like Vinnie Coletta, who that was the main thing I did. But I had a few jobs where I did that. My very first time inking Gusima, it was a job on Kazar number 7. You want to look it up, a horrible job. One of my very first inking jobs in color, in fact, was the very first color comic I inked. I did some black and white magazine inking before I got into color comics. And they were going to give it to Coletta, but he was either out of town or busy on something else. And there was nobody. There were fewer people in the business back then in the early 70s, but there was just nobody that could ink this job. And I'm sitting there, John Verporten was the production manager. John, I'll take that job. And he, I don't know. I don't think you're ready. I said, oh, please, it's John. Let me do it. I'll do it for you. And he said, well, it's a rush job. You know, I've got to have it in, and it wasn't that bad. I think it was maybe 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But to ink breakdowns, and I had never inked breakdowns before, and it was John Buscema's breakdowns, who everybody in the business knows were the loosest breakdowns of anybody. And so he reluctantly gave me the job. And so I was working like every waking hour, sleeping 4 hours a night. I had Joe Rubenstein tightening up the pencils for me. Neil Adams inked a couple heads on the job. Klaus Janson inked a couple pages. We were rushing through this, trying to get it done. And of course, that's the week my family decided to come visit from Florida. And they wanted me to show them around New York.
There's New York. It's over that way. So going back to the New Mutants, how much time did you put in to designing the characters, and how did you go about that? I mean, now we know about these things like style boards and all this stuff where people gather all this stuff and, you know, make a Photoshop files of all their inspirations, but the business really wasn't like that back then. You didn't make inspiration boards and, you know, that whole thing. So how did you go about, also because you're drawing teenagers, so you didn't want them to look like the regular X-Men, who were supposed to, at one time, I guess, supposed to be like teenagers. But even when Jack Kirby drew a teenager, they weren't really like teenagers. They were like linebackers. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm interested in, like, because you really did give them a sort of a geeky, gawky quality to make them look. And I'm seeing, and you've been posting like pencils and stuff, which is great. Everybody should follow Bob on Facebook, because he's always sharing so much great stuff from his time in comics, his history of comics. So I'm sort of interested in that. And did you model the character, like in Judge Parker or even the Phantom? Sometimes I will pick an actor or an actress, which I learned from Al. Like if you pick an actor, it's sort of easy to kind of start imagining that person And now, because of the internet, you can find lots of photos of that person. So were you doing any of that? Were you saying, well, this character's sort of like this person's like this person? I'm sort of interested in that.
Nope. No, I didn't do any of that. I just pulled it out of my imagination. I did a couple pages for each character, sketches with them, shorter, taller, thinner, stronger, just different looks for them. And I really credit my years studying Mort Drucker for how I draw characters that look like people as opposed to superheroes. And, I like to draw people more than I like to draw Superman and Wonder Woman. Normal people, average people. I'd have a great time drawing Jamar and you as opposed to Superman or Wonder Woman, So when I designed the New Mutants, and it was kind of the thrust of the book too, these were kids. They weren't supposed to be looking like Sue Storm and Reed Richards, right? They were supposed to look like teenagers, kids. So I just drew what I thought teenagers look like, and what a Cheyenne girl would look like, and what a Brazilian kid would look like. My idea of a color was just some kind of hillbilly looking guy that might have big ears and was kind of just tall and gangly, is how I came up with Cannonball. Although I did a sketch of Cannonball looking real buff and muscular as well. But I didn't stick with that. I liked the other look for him better. And my sketches of them have been published in a couple places. So they're out there in the world. You can probably find them. But just my imagination.
No, so you didn't go like to the New York Public Library and look at Cheyenne Indian reference or anything like that, or?
Nope. No, I think might have been Chris's idea to give her that turquoise belt that she had early on. I just gave her long hair and I think a vest with fringe on it, boots. I don't know, probably pretty stereotypical Hollywood movie Indian. I wish now, of course, in retrospect, everything is so much more obvious. But at the time, we had to start working on this, and it kind of, even though there wasn't a deadline, they wanted to get it underway, and I was probably working on something else at the same time too to pay the bills, and I just didn't put that much work into it.
So, like, if you were doing it over today, you would probably do what I was saying in the beginning.
Yeah. If it was something that was coming up today, I definitely would look at Cheyenne Indians and see what they're actually like. I would look at some people from Brazil that are half white and half black and see what they look like, and I would learn about more about the Native American customs and what they might value and think was important to have on their bodies or whatever, all that kind of stuff. I just, like I said, there were different times, and back then, we used to do everything. We would do ellipses freehand. We didn't use ellipse guides. Everything was just kind of more fundamental and done just more, not really casually, because a lot of work went into it, but a different kind of work,
Or you could be like Ricardo Villagrán and ink the ellipse perfect with a brush. So,
well, I've watched Neil Adams do that with a brush, just practice drawing circles with his brush, just as a dexterity exercise. So of course Neil tried it, so I would try it. And that too, but
Well, somebody asked me a question a while ago, and I want to try to fold it into this conversation. And Bob, I didn't ask you, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling fine. Thanks for checking. Yep. I'm fine.
All right. I got to check on you. Make sure your levels are good.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me, I can't remember what exactly it was about, but it was kind of like okay, this is it. It's kind of like a new way of looking at the history of comic books and how the new fans or kind of like young students of the history of comics put a lot of thought that may not have been there at the beginning on characters. Kind of like, to hear about how the New Mutants were created. I'm sure somebody would think that somebody was in the public library pouring through tomes and trying to get all of these kind of like archetypes correct. And, I said to them, not that it didn't matter, because all of it matters, but I think it matters in a different way than I think you guys believe it does, if that makes any sense. So like to hear what you just said about like the creation of some of the characters and like the looks, and it's almost like you're going more for a feel or like an energy with the character creation more than it being historically accurate.
Yeah, well, the main thing I wanted was for them to look like normal people. I didn't want to have handsome superheroes.
Right.
So, and when the Comics Journal reviewed the New Mutants graphic novel after we finished it, they said something about, well, these sure are the ugliest superheroes to date, or something to that effect. And that was deliberate. I wasn't trying to make them good looking. I wanted them to look like average people.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then after I left the book, other artists came on and turned them into good looking superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up making Roberto the same height as Sam Guthrie and doing all kinds of stuff that just drove me nuts. So, what can you do? That's comics.
Mm.
Yeah, and I also think that people today, it's very common. We're having these kind of discussions a lot of people judging the past by today's yardstick, and you really can't, because comics was so different back then that, like, the Planet of the Apes would come out, and then everybody would go, next week we're making ape comics, right? That's how the business was. It reacted to what was in fashion. So like if Star Wars came out, everybody made something like Star Wars because that was what was popular. And 10 things would hit the wall and 9 would fall on the floor and 1 would stick.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And even when I got into the mid 80s, it was way more loosey-goosey than it is now. There was no big giant editorial meeting where everybody's going to have 52 books at all tied together, and there was none of that. You could pitch something, or you could do a job, you could do a one shot. The business was very, very different and much more cheap than it is. It was more fly by night, more cheap, and if you look at a guy like Kirby, who looked at himself as an entertainer, and so a lot of the things that he did in the late 60s and the early 70s, like Commandi, was a reaction to stuff that was popular, like Planet of the Apes or Logan's Run or things like that. So they were looking at what was popular and going, what do kids like? Oh, they like this thing. Okay, let's make some more of that, because that's what's selling,
Yeah, but then what they were doing, they were adults making comics for kids. And that switched over to kids making comics for adults. As they grew up and got in the business, they started making comics for themselves and for their own age group and kind of forgot about, well, where's the next generation of comic fans going to come from? For quite a while there, they quit doing comics for kids. And
they still don't really do comics for kids if you think about it in a great sense.
There are some out there, but they're not generally the mainstream. They're not the big two so much. They're smaller. Yeah. yeah, but Marvel and DC, I mean, I grew up reading the Superman family of comics with Crypto the Superdog and Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane, all that stuff. And it was great fun. And you can read those as an adult and really enjoy them, or you can read them as a 10-year-old and really enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to so many of today's comics where it's all violence and it's dark and serious, and you don't know what's going on, and you got to read 6 other comics to figure out the storyline. And the business has changed so much. I feel like it was a lot more fun back in the 70s and 80s to be in the business. It was a smaller, like when I started at Marvel, it was more like a family business. I mean, Stan Lee's office was right down the hall. You could go in and talk to Stan if you wanted to. Marie Severin was there. John Romita was there. Mike Esposito, Frank Giacoya. Everybody was right there in the office. And it felt like there were only 20 people working for Marvel. It just was a much smaller, friendlier place. We would have Marvel softball games and Marvel volleyball games. It was just a fantastic time, really. Whereas now, I think the last time I went in the Marvel office, I had to make an appointment and wait out in this waiting room. And then they finally let me in, and I saw the editor, and then I had to go. Whereas I got most of my early jobs just from hanging out in the office all day. Job would come in and say, "Yeah, I'll take that." You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice? Because things are very different in that. I always say that the Pangea that we came into doesn't exist now. So when people approach you, the young artists approach you for advice, what kind of advice do you give them besides like learn how to draw better?
Draw faster.
Draw faster.
There's pluses and minuses, right? So you can't start the way I started. You can't learn on the job the way I was able to do. But then again, when I started, it was very difficult to self-publish, and it's really relatively easy to self-publish now and inexpensive. When I started, there were no graphic novels. There were nobody making movies from your project where you could suddenly, hit it big just by creating something that some movie executive saw. There's all this potential varying opportunities that exist today that didn't exist when I started. So today I would tell somebody to try to work on a graphic novel, a middle grade graphic novel. My wife's been a middle school librarian. My daughter's a middle school librarian. They can't keep them on the shelf. That's all the kids want to read. So graphic novels are booming, even as traditional comic books are dying. Self-publishing, just get your work out there so that maybe some TV executive or movie executive will see it and want to make a show out of it.
Well, Bob, that brings us to the $400 question of the night. Is just hearing about how many stops and starts with the movie. People have been talking about this movie like it was never going to happen, and I'm sure you have a totally different vibe about that whole process. But now it finally came out, and I know you had some feelings about it that you posted online. Before I get into that, and I don't really want to dig too deep into that, can you talk a little bit about how, like you just said, coming up in the 70s and the 80s at Marvel, and that there really wasn't a next level platform for any of the stuff. And now, like the MCU and just the way superhero movies are so big now, do you feel like that's a next evolution in the art form? Or is it just nice that they decided to make a movie out of the stuff? How do you feel about the movies and all this stuff, the attention in general?
I mean, again, there's positive and negatives. I feel like print media in general is dying. Newspaper, comic strips are getting smaller and going away. Cartoons and magazines. Who publishes cartoons anymore besides the New Yorker? They used to be in all magazines. There used to be art illustrating stories in so many magazines, and all that's gone away. It's all been replaced by photography. Book covers were a huge business for a long time for artists, and now that all that's either photographs or no picture at all, or some kind of photoshopped photograph or something. So a lot of things are harder and worse, but then again, there's video games. Someone has to design all those video games and the characters and the worlds and everything. That's a great opportunity. The movies, look at the credits of any movie and look how many artists are working on those movies.
Thousands.
Yeah, it's a huge world out there, and if you just are persistent, and like what they told me when I first went up to New York, good advice Neil Adams gave me. He said, let them know you're not going away, that you're here to stay, that you're not going to take no for an answer. You're going to do something, and you'd like to do it for them. Just get your work out there and keep trying. Don't give up, basically.
He's still doing that. I mean, the guy's on Facebook every day with some live new thingy or whatever. He's the only guy of that generation that's still doing that.
He's amazing. He's a real workhorse, still putting out new stuff and doing videos on YouTube and everything. Neil's an amazing guy.
Well, how do you kind of absorb a lot of questions about the movie stuff? Does it annoy you? Are you excited to talk about a new way of people viewing something you co-created? Is it just stressful to talk about something you may have not had enough of a hand in? Like, how do you know? I think this is what we really get to talk about, having all of our famous friends on the show. Like, how does that bounce off of you when you have to talk about this stuff?
Look, when we created the New Mutants, there might have been the Superman movies around at that time. What was around in 1982? Not much. Marvel had legal reasons why they couldn't get their character on the movie screen. They weren't making movies about superheroes. And when Chris and I saw that they had put in the contract that we would get money if they ever made a movie, The New Mutants, we laughed about it. Like, right, they're going to make a movie, The New Mutants? Sure. I mean, it was a joke. So for them to actually have made a movie of characters that we created, it's amazing. It's very flattering in one way. It's humbling in a way. It's exciting. All kind of adjectives. And then, of course, it's the usual thing. It's a business, and there's things that they do in movies that we don't do in comics. They do them differently for different reasons. Movies have no obligation to be faithful to their source material, really. It's most of the public has never read comics, so what we did in the comics is really irrelevant. What percent of the public actually reads comics? 1%. I mean, it's not much. So they can't be worried too much about the comics when they're making a movie. On the other hand, the movie directors and producers are often fans of the comics, and they want to do stuff like we did in the comics. So it goes both ways. So there's a lot of things about the New Mutants movie that I really don't I don't want to say I don't like, because I haven't even seen the movie. But from what I have seen of it and what I've heard about it, it's not at all the way I would have done it to introduce these characters to the world that doesn't know them. I mean, it's intriguing to do it as a horror film. I thought that was actually a cool idea to put them in a different genre, to bring horror fans in to see them as well as comic fans and superhero fans. It's probably a good marketing thing. But then again, I wanted to make sure that within the movie they emphasized that they were mutants who had these abilities and not just random teenagers. And I didn't see that in the very first clip that they showed 2 years ago. And so I was wondering, well, what are they doing in this movie? And then I was looking at the characters, and they've changed them totally from the way I designed them. So I felt like there wasn't much left of my contribution to the New Mutants that made it into the movie. I mean, they did use my characters, and it went for 100 issues in the comics. There were a lot of characters introduced that I had nothing to do with, that they might have used instead. So at least they were using my characters that I co-created with Chris. There's so many things, and maybe I'll have a different opinion after I see the movie at last. But
they didn't send you a screener.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? I've said, or I kind of feel just kind of snubbed by the movie because they haven't contacted me, or as far as I know, Chris, at all since this first got going to this day. They didn't even just say, "Hey, making a movie of your characters." Just wanted to say hi, just wanted to meet you, or whatever. Would have been nice.
Right.
To be invited to the premiere would have been nice. Just to have them some kind of knowledge that they know that we're alive would have been nice. But like I said, they're under no obligation to do that, and I understand that. And I understand that the director is a big fan of Bill Sienkiewicz's run on the New Mutants, not my run on the New Mutants, and that's fine. I understand that. I like Bill Sienkiewicz's art. I just am not excited about the movie the way I was when I first heard that they were doing it. I'm kind of at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how that can happen. I mean, it's you're right. I mean, that's the hard, having your comic go into a movie. That was sort of like in the old days, I guess, guys in comics getting a newspaper strip. That was like the Valhalla. That was the highest thing. If you could graduate from comic books and do a comic strip, then you were like, that was the ultimate thing. Now it's from comic books, and then they take it and they make it a movie. But you're right. I mean, I went through a development process on something a couple of years ago, or like 10 years ago now, 15 years ago now. And it was very frustrating because they take your thing, you're excited, great. And then through the process, very often, as you learn, very often they kind of completely, they keep the name, and then everything else can be totally changed. And that's, like you said, that's the way, it's just the way it is. And people who work in Hollywood, and we have friends who work in Hollywood, they're used to that because that's part of the system, right? To us, it seems odd. It's like you saying, "Oh, you wanna, I'm famous Amos, and you wanna buy my recipe, and you wanna make my cookies." And then you take my recipe and you so screw with it that it doesn't taste anything like the cookie that I made. And then they go, "But aren't you happy? We made your cookie."
Yeah.
So it's like, I suppose if you get money, you lick your wounds. I think you cannot imagine that it would be what you would want it to be, because unless you were making it yourself, You know, that's just the way it is. It's frustrating, but I think you have a good you have to have a good attitude, and you almost have to kind of remove yourself from it. I mean, I was talking to Danny Fingerroth earlier today about some stuff, and you know, they've done several redos of Darkhawk since I worked on the book, but I made it a point when I left the book never to look at it after I left it. Just because of that. Just because even though it's something you create for this company and they say that you're the creator, they still own 99.9999% of it and can do whatever they want to it 9 ways to Sunday. And if you attach your heart too much to it at a certain point, it will hurt you, because that's the hard part too about doing this for a living, is that you did it. All the things you told us tonight, you did it because you loved it. You loved comics. This is your desire. This is what you wanted to do. And the hard rub of this business sometimes for a young artist to realize is that the hardest part, right? And your love is somebody else's business.
Yeah, I quit reading the New Mutants after I left the book. I didn't read any of the issues after the ones I worked on. When this movie came out, or heard they were making the movie, I had to go dig out my copies because, you know, Marvel used to send me a copy of everything they published. So I had the comics. I just never read them. So I got them out and read the Demon Mirror storyline that the movie is supposedly based on for the first time. So I had seen them around. So I knew that Bill worked on the book, and I'd seen, you know, this and that he had done covers mainly. And all the various artists that worked on the book after I left. But I didn't read any of them. Because I didn't want to be frustrated by seeing what they were doing with my babies.
Mm-hmm. Hey, you know what, Bob? I want to start wrapping you up because you were nice enough to hang out with us for so long. But I have some lightning round questions for you, if you don't mind, and then we'll get you out of here.
Sure.
So our good buddy Matt Waringo, Mike's brother, says, Bob, I asked you once at a show about your Hulk magazine painted story. Would love for you to talk about it. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, that was a story that I did where I penciled and inked and lettered and did full color on for the full color Hulk magazine. And the editor told me they had spent their budget on the Howard Chaykin book story that was in the back of the magazine, and they couldn't afford for me to do the artwork full size, and they'd have to shrink it down. So I had to do it actual print size, which made no sense to me.
I'm going, how does that make any sense?
How does that make any sense? But that's what he told me. So I had to do that whole job 6 by 9 inches.
Wow.
Which there's a reason we do artwork a third bigger, and they used to do it twice up. For one thing, it's really hard to letter that small. But anyway, so all of those originals are pretty small. And I did that job, really poured my heart into it. It was a fantasy job written by Doug Munch. And the only comments I got after I turned it in, and I thought I did a really nice job on it, was that it was kind of cartoony, like I didn't take it seriously enough. And they didn't offer me another job after that. It was a bad experience as a job. I had fun doing the job, but again, it's a business, and the business of comics has always just kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand how you could have done it any size. They're going to reduce it when they shoot it down anyway on film, so how that makes any sense.
I think he was just a jerk, the editor.
Okay. That I believe.
Hard to believe, right? Yeah.
All right.
That I believe, yeah.
All right, Bob, last one. This is from our good buddy Tim Fielder, who's a fantastic graphic novelist. Tim says, "Hi, Bob, fan of your work. What advice would you give to artists as they move into their later years of their careers? Pitfalls and/or opportunities?"
I mean, I think you have to make your own opportunities as you get further into your career. The pitfalls are you get older, but the editors don't seem to get older. They keep hiring young editors in their 20s, and they only know what's on the stands today, and they don't know the history. They don't know your work. They may have never heard of you, and your work to them might look old-fashioned or sound old-fashioned if you're a writer. You know, just it's not what some guy in their 20s is doing. So the people you're trying to sell your work to might be looking for something very different from what you've been doing for the last 20, 30 years. So you have to make your own opportunities. When my work in comics started drying up, and it never really dried up, it just got harder to find work every month. I would have to call more editors, look around more, and it just got to be kind of a hassle to find my next job. So I started looking outside comics for other things to do. And that's when I started editing Rough Stuff magazine, and it's when I did my superhero ABC book, which you almost got the title right early on. Superhero ABC. You know, different things like that. I illustrated a book for some psychologist. I did a lot of stuff outside comics, and I started doing more commissions. I had never done commissions because I was always too busy doing comics. So in the 2000s, after 30 years in comics, I started doing a lot of commissions for the fans. And fortunately, in our business, you develop a fan base, and it gives you an opportunity to cater to those fans and work for those fans. So, it's very nice. I'm very fortunate. And I was going to say about the movie too, how many people can say that there's been a movie made of something that they did? So I don't like to complain about the movie because I feel so fortunate to have been involved in anything, even in a distant way with that. I think working in comics it's been an amazing career. I've been very lucky. I had a great time. Still having a good time. I'm very lucky.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Tim. That was a great question, and I loved your answer, Bob. So, Mike, you have anything left for Bob?
Oh, I just was going to ask Bob, what's besides the drawing? Oh, how is it to ink something that you drew that far back?
Yeah.
Do you go like, what the hell was I doing? Or that was, why I can't attain that greatness again?
No, there's a reason why I never inked that. Is because I never really nailed the drawing down. So as I started to ink it, I started erasing a lot of stuff and redrawing it and eliminating things and adding things. My whole career, I've never been a tracer. It's even inking my own stuff. I just leave a lot for the inking. So I always make changes as I'm inking, and this was no different. I made a lot of changes. I still enjoy doing this. It's fun work, but it's harder. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be. So a lot of times I'm working with something that actually looks blurry, and I have to kind of squint to make it look clear enough to get that little hair thin ink line down.
Do you have different kinds of glasses for drawing? Like I have my close glasses for drawing, and then I have my other. I don't want to wear the.
When I draw, I do this because
okay.
My eyes are still better than my glasses, because if I'm drawing, I've got trifocals. I've got to draw like this, trying to look under the here or hold it out here. So it's just easier for me to just take my glasses off when I work.
Did you always wear glasses? Did you always wear glasses?
Since I was 7.
Okay. Because I know, because there's some people who didn't wear glasses, and by the time they're in their 40s doing this, your eyes start to focus, so you will wear glasses,
Yeah. That's my wife. My wife always had perfect vision until she was about 60, and now she has about 6 different pairs of glasses.
So also, what are your favorite 3 or 4 jobs, either that you penciled, ink, or other people? Because that's the one thing I enjoy, is inking other people's work. Like when I ink somebody like Brett or John Hebink, or I've inked a lot of different people's work. It's fun to do that. It's like you're collaborating, and you touched on that. I mean, it's like when Wally Wood inked Jack Kirby, you got something that was neither guy, but was better, right? And that's something that's kind of unique to the American comics, because Mobius didn't ink, Drouillet, or that's not something that you experienced really in the European market or even in the Japanese market. That's something that really, like Tom Palmer inking Neil Adams or Sinnott inking Kirby, actually changed the way Kirby penciled stuff. I think you could see that effect on his work.
When that works well, it's amazing. All those great pencil inker teams. My favorite to ink was John Buscema, because he gave me the most to do, that I could contribute the most. I loved inking Gene Colan. Very
hard. Was he hard to ink?
I mean, you have to decide what to do with all the different shades of gray, because he pencils very tonally with a lot of lights and darks instead of a line so much, So you've got to decide, is that going to be black, or is it going to be zipatone, or is it going to be rendered lines, or what exactly are you going to do where? So it's a lot of interpreting to ink him, but I didn't have a particular problem with it, so I had fun with him. Those two I've always liked inking Mike Zeck's work. He's easy and fun to ink. Mike Golden was fun to ink.
But Mike Golden is tight, though. That's because I inked Golden. I inked a job of his, and everything is so perfect. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. No, I inked his pencils, which are like, well, why do we even need to ink it? You know what I mean? It's just like a machine did it or something.
I inked a job of Micronauts that he penciled tights, and that wasn't as much fun, but still, he's got such a charming style that I had a good time on it. But I inked a lot of breakdowns. I inked Burns breakdowns, Golden's breakdowns, Buscema's breakdowns, Sal Buscema's breakdowns, Ron Friend's. I spent a lot of time inking breakdowns. I enjoyed it. I felt I was good at it. So it was always fun to ink breakdowns. My own stuff, I'm best known for the New Mutants, but that was kind of torture working on that series. So Teen Hulk from Crazy Magazine, some of my favorite work. And since I read Superman as a kid, actually getting the assignment to draw him for my job was a real treat. So I loved working on Superman. I quit that again because I wanted to ink myself. But I had a good time working on Superman. Star Wars, of course, is fun to do. And I got to be inked by my favorite inker, Tom Palmer, on that. So that was great. I was lucky. I had a lot of fun stuff to work on.
So now, are you doing any comic projects now, or are you mostly just doing your commissions and doing your own thing?
I just recently finished painting a mural on our garage. Just a landscape mural. You know, I like you. You've actually done it. I would like to do some painting, and my wife got bored of looking at our garage out the kitchen window when she was cooking or working in the kitchen, and wanted me to put a mural on the garage. So I did that this summer, and I do commission.
What's it a mural of?
It's a I got two different reference photos. One is a island in Greece. We went to a comic convention in Greece last year and took some photos. So I painted on the right hand side is a island in Greece that we stayed at, and on the left is an island. I forget where the photo was from. I think it was from Maine, possibly. So it's two islands with water in between and a sunset above. It just something that I thought I would enjoy painting, and I had a good time doing it. A little weird to put a landscape on your garage, but what the heck.
Well, I guess it beats putting a barbarian on the side of a van, right?
Bob, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, it was great.
And where should people look you up? I know you're on Facebook. You're on Instagram? Are you on Instagram?
You know, Instagram, you got to post from your phone, and I do everything on my desktop. So it's kind of a pain to try to get anything on Instagram for me. So I just use Facebook, and occasionally, rarely, I'll do something on Twitter. After this recent firestorm, I don't think I'll be on Twitter again anytime soon.
Yes, that is unfortunate.
I do have a website, and I wish you'd go to my website and check it out, bobmccloud.com. You can. It's kind of underway right now. It's been redesigned, and the guy that is working on it for me is in the process of finishing it up. So he's still adding a lot of things to it. It'll have all my original art that's for sale, and my rates for commissions and what have you, prints for sale, that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Great. Well, you know, actually, I was going to tell you, there are a couple plugins for Chrome that you can use to publish to Instagram from your desktop. So that's what I use a lot now, because that's one of the drawbacks to Instagram is having to put it someplace else so you can grab it so it's on your phone so you can put it on Instagram. So
right. Can you email me that stuff so that I can take advantage of that? I've tried and can't get figured out.
Yeah. Because that is the drawback to Instagram. But that seems like where everybody sort of slowly migrated from Facebook.
Yeah,
because you're just seeing all the images on Instagram, you know. So
yeah, and I would like to migrate from Facebook because, of course, I hate Mike Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I think the minute somebody comes up with something that's even a quarter as good as Facebook, everybody's going to jump. Everybody's going to jump right off of Facebook and go to that other thing, and then say the same thing. Same thing.
Just buy it up though and make it his own.
Probably. Yeah. So you should invent that, Bob.
Okay, get on that.
I'll get on. Let me finish up this one thing here, and then I'll get on that, Mike.
Okay. Finish making that piece, and then take over Facebook.
Yeah.
All right, Bob. Thanks so much
Bob.
for being with us. I hope we can have you on again soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And I hope, like I said, there's a couple of questions that didn't get answered. Maybe if you have time, we'll take you back into the Facebook page and you can answer those in replies.
And everybody should go to Facebook and follow Bob, because you can see so much great art that he's posting. I enjoy seeing that every day.
Thanks. Nice talking to you guys.
All right. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Good night.
You.
It's my Spider-Man 67 fall right there. We had a great time hanging out with Bob. He was a good sport. And, you know, I love talking about these kind of like really high pinnacle careers of almost all of our guests, right, Mike? I feel like the caliber of guests we have on, including yourself and Brett, Mike, brings such a richness to the program. Because if you consider everybody that we've had on the show have been at the top of their careers, or if not, they're on their way up there, or they're kind of like hanging out at the top.
Well, and I think what I love about talking to guys like Bob who were in the business before me is we get to hear a little bit of the history of the business and what the business used to be like, and what the business is now. And so I hope that the younger artists who are listening to this, or people who are just sort of interested in the history of comics, get a little bit of behind the curtain, because it's hard for people to kind of understand, if you're coming into it now and you're 20, what it was like to be 20 in like 1980.
Yeah, or 75.
Right, or 75. The business was, like Bob said, the business was so much smaller. If you threw a rock, you could hit everybody. You know, and I miss. I don't miss a lot about the 80s, but I do miss that time of comics in the 80s. If only just to travel back in time to get all that art supplies.
Yeah, get all those nibs in the board. And put it in your DeLorean.
That's exactly. Why is that man appearing out of nowhere and just hoarding 500 brushes, you know, and all the Pelican ink?
They're chasing you out of Pearl Paint in New York.
Yeah, right. Another business that is gone, Pearl Paint. They were like an institution for forever.
I remember, and I wasn't in New York back then, but I remember when Pearl. It took a while for Pearl to hit Philly, because Pearl was real big in Jersey, and then when Pearl came to Philly, because we had
on South Street.
Yeah, that we had before that. We had Utrecht,
Tawes,
and Tawes, and that was before Blick was here. Dick Blick was still in Allentown, and that was there. And I remember driving to Allentown just to check out this fantastic warehouse of an art supply store. But yeah, Pearl came and went. It's crazy. And I guess the only thing in town now is Blick.
And
artist and craftsman. Yeah.
Well, Blick killed Pearl. They just couldn't compete.
It was the big box. They got big box. Just kind of.
Well, the thing is I think that the old art supply places will be a little sloppy, and they can kind of be assholes when you go in. Like, oh, you're looking for that? I'm sorry, I cannot be bothered to tell you what floor the Bristol board is on.
While you're talking to them, I'm stealing spray paint.
Right, so I remember when Pearl first came, they were really good, and then their service kind of went down the tubes, and Utrecht, I remember they would be stocked at the beginning of the semester when all the art students would come in, and then they wouldn't have anything for like 3-4 months. You try to go and buy something, they would just be out of stock. It seemed like for a really long time. And that's the one thing about Blick, is they always seem to be well stocked. Yeah.
I remember back when I was at UArts in school, this had to have been 91, and there was the great placa shortage of Pennsylvania. Everybody in foundations and basics needed a jar of black placa, like that really thick ink. It was almost like poster paint and ink.
Right.
And it was all gone. And that was like before the internet, and you couldn't just like go to Jerry's Artorama and order a case. It wasn't there anymore. But yeah, Tawes was like the big kind of graphic design
Yeah, you could get
store.
stuff shot there. You could get
Yeah.
stats made and all that stuff that nobody knows what is anymore. But yeah, there used to be several service bureaus in Philadelphia where you could go get a stat made, you could get negatives made, you could get stuff done, things scanned, drum scanned. I remember I was doing some covers, and I would have to take them down and have them drum scanned, and then they would give you the actual film,
Mm-hmm.
the 4-color separations.
Yeah.
Now everything is scanned. Nothing is done those old ways. In fact, I was talking to my dad the other day, and we were talking about like because he's a really good photographer, and even trying to find the chemicals now to do photography, do printing, find paper. There used to be a lot of places in Philly you could find those places, and like almost all those places are gone now. So, you know, you can go through the what was it, there was a website for like old art supplies or something, and they show all that stuff from the up until the 90s really kind of killed off all that stuff.
I know there were a lot of, I think I did a review of this in Draw, but I found a lot of nib resellers on Etsy. It's almost kind of like a niche market. This guy had some old, I think, no, he had old stock of discontinued nibs, and he was also kind of creating new issues. Like I think he had like a smelting deal at his place. I don't really remember the particulars of it. But
there was a place in England, I believe it was called, or maybe it was in Chicago. It was called Pendragon. They have a supply. Oh, gosh, this is going back into the 90s now. A supply of old pen nibs, and I think because of Inktober, a lot of the young kids have gotten into trying to draw with the nibs again.
Yeah.
So some of them have been hunting. eBay used to be a good source where you could go on there and buy stuff, and it was pretty cheap. And now, of course, like now everybody's into it. It's like, oh, now it's like, you know, everybody's like, it's like you're buying, you know, gold from Davy Jones' locker or something. You know, it's like, oh,
you know what? You're right, because I remember kind of early eBay, or maybe even like 15 years ago, I used to buy blue coal erase pencils in bulk.
Right.
eBay, and now that's not the wave anymore. They got hip to that. Mike, the chat is kind of blowing up talking about the chessboard of art supply stores, about how Dick Blick bought Utrecht, and now there's Utrecht brand supplies at Blick, and JRD says that Blick bought Utrecht after Winsor Newton bought Pantone.
Yep.
It's just like big fish eating.
But that's been going on since the 90s. You know, Cornor buying somebody buying Cornor buying Elvin. I mean, all these companies that made stuff like your templates, you know, your various circle templates and things like that.
They're like my rolling ruler.
All those companies have one by one been either merged or sold with somebody else. And it started with and I noticed even I was looking at the paper, the Strathmore paper, and just looking at holding it up to the light and seeing the way it was put together. It's not, you can actually look at the paper and not see the consistency of how the paper was made compared to an old sheet. If I hold up to the light, it all looks consistent. So
Michael Cooper, who's been hanging out with us, says, I'm still trying to get over the whole butt hair sable thing.
Yeah, so every time you do that with your brush, you're pulling a sable's butt right in your mouth.
Oh, Sable's butt. That's our new sponsor.
Sable's butt. The best brushes you can purse with your lips.
Nice. All right, let's start wrapping this up. I think we had a great night. Thank you guys, all our pencilers that come and check in with us every Wednesday and Saturday. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and smash that bell so you can get notified on YouTube when we have our next guest lined up.
Which is Saturday.
Yes, but I have a graphic. So this Saturday, Mike, we do not have a guest, but you know what that means. We're going back to boot camp, brother.
Hip, hip, hurdle, hip.
What is it? Drop and give me 20 pages.
That's right.
So I've been talking to Mike, and I think we're still deciding what our topic's going to be for boot camp.
Drawing circles with a template. I think that's what we've come up with. That it's a certain way to do it.
There you go. But yeah, I'm excited about it, and as I always say, the channel and our podcast only grows by you spreading the word, spread the love, signal boost. Don't keep this to yourself. Don't hoard our love, Mike Manley. You got to spread that out, right? And you know,
don't take your love to town.
We just spent a great 2 hours talking to Bob Mccloud. Like, where else are you going to get that?
Nowhere else but pencil to pencil.
What pencil to pencil? That's right.
And we've got in October, rest of September and October, we're going to just have just such a great lineup of guests.
It's thick. Maybe I'll do kind of like a teaser with like a bunch of upcoming guests, just so I don't,
Just like show like their eye, and then you have to guess whose eye is this. Can you tell?
Whose bloodshot eye is that? Yeah, that'll be great. But yeah, thanks a lot, you guys. We're going to wrap this up. Like I said, we're here live every Wednesday and Saturday night, 8 p.m. EST. I always come along people who go, oh, wait, you guys are on? Yep, the same time.
I missed it. What?
How did I miss it?
Well, because you didn't go and sign up.
Yeah, that's right. I really think the longer we're on, the more those notifications are going to come in handy. So if you follow us on the Facebook page, when I set everything up in StreamYard, you get a bing, tells you who the guest is. There's a nice little graphic, and you can even like sign up for notifications right there. Drop questions in days before the guest gets in. And I would actually like more of those because it kind of front loads some of the questions for the evening.
Yeah, especially for the boot camps too.
Yeah, especially for the boot camp. So I know the boot camps are special. I hope that you are interested. I saw on one of our platforms, Mike, somebody was like sharing our post with somebody else and says, hey, Frankie would love this. He should check it out. And here's one other thing I want to say, and I don't think we have an age range, Mike, for what we do, but we're talking a lot of like old school adult comic book shop. I'm not exactly sure if somebody who's 10 years old would get the same kind of impact out of the podcast than somebody who's, been in, swirling around the business or trying to get to the next level of their comic book.
Right. I mean, if you're 10 years old, you're learning real basic stuff. And there's plenty of people on YouTube that show you that real basic stuff. But
yeah, I'm
not here trying to show you how to make a clown out of drawing like 3 circles and a banana and a triangle kind of a thing,
Letter 3, you could make an elephant.
Exactly.
Number 3, yeah. Right.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit more advanced because I think there's a much larger audience for that. I mean, we're not gonna have Bob Mccloud on today, so we can say this is how you draw a lion.
Right. Yeah. If you've noticed how we do things, not to say that there's no point of entry for a young person to watch this, but that's not the intended audience for what we're talking about.
No. I mean, if I wanted to do videos on how to do some basic cartooning, I would do something on just real basic cartooning. But I think what we have to offer is pretty unique, and there's a lot of people who cover basic stuff. So I don't think my interest is as an artist and in teaching is teaching people the really basic stuff, because there's plenty of stuff out there for that right now. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of stuff that has what we have to offer. Also, the fact that we cover a very wide scope with talking to artists. So we're going to have people who work in animation coming up, character designers in animation, Disney animators. We got a lot of people coming up on the podcast that I think, again, show the connectivity of drawing across all kinds of genres and platforms and styles, but they all have a lot of the common core of drawing, and then how you deploy it or why you deploy it comes later. So we've got a lot of really top flight people coming up in the next couple of months on the podcast. And if you have some suggestions, again, send them to us. Let us know what people you would like to see. We have asked some. Not everybody is going to, I have some people that we ask and they're like way too nervous. They don't want to talk live. That scares them. They're like, they don't want to do that. They don't want to have their face. Don't show my face. Anything but the face.
That's right. But as you guys can see, we're here for the long haul, and it's just going to get better every time. So we strive to give you a quality product for free, Mike Manley. Free,
I know.
Free
100. That's right.
Yeah.
Completely free. All it costs is the electricity in your cable bill.
Somebody said, and then we'll wrap it up. Somebody said to me, "You're not charging for this? Like you guys are throwing out master classes like twice a week." But, I think there's a point of entry for that. And that's why you need to share this and get something from it. All right. All right, cool. All right, that's our time, you guys. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Thanks again to Bob Mccloud for spending his evening with us. This has been the Pencil to Pencil podcast. For my best bud, Mike, where is he? For my best bud, Mike Manley, I'm Jamar Nicholas. And you know what happens next. Wash your hands. Then a show of Kirby hands. We'll see you on Saturday.